You're listening to the Fanmarillion, an unofficial companion podcast for the Amazon Prime series The Rings of Power. I'm your host, Glorfindoll, reacting to the show each week and dwelling on it down in the Dwarves. That's right, this episode took us to the Dwarves, motherfucker! Khazad-dûm, the infamous Dwarven Kingdom. I have been waiting for this since I first saw it in the trailer, ladies and gents. I rate this second episode as only one glass of wine. I was so interested and engaged that I didn't need to refill at all. A startling improvement over episode 1, I must say. And a development that makes me very hopeful for the rest of the season. I hope it continues. This rating is wholly managed by mystical moments with the stranger and the entirety of the dwarf scenes. Let's hit the story highlights and get right into it. The episode starts with Galadriel floating in the open ocean after her brave leap from retirement back into the workforce of hunting down the evil in Middle-earth. She commits to the decision and starts the long swim back. Good luck, girl. Then we see some exciting otherworldliness from a very tired stranger in his asteroid bed. Not cozy. Luckily, the Harfoots, led by the curious Nori, put him in a wheelbarrow and take him somewhere cozier. Hijinks abound. What endears me to the stranger, who, by the start of this episode, it's clear, is going to be one of the Istari wizards, and I think we can all guess which one he's going to be. What endears me to him is how the showrunners designed and leaned into his Maiar status. He has this incongruity with this plane of existence. He clearly doesn't belong here. He can't even stand up straight. He doesn't speak the common tongue. He seems uncomfortable in his skin, like he doesn't usually have skin. He can't control the force he's exerting on the space around him. It's expertly done, and everything I would have wanted out of a Maiar newly arrived in Middle-earth, which we covered last week. A Maiar is a spiritual figure of great powers from the Old Continent, just like Sauron and just like a Balrog. But with the way they've launched his arrival, I think watching Gandalf become the great wizard we know and love could be really great to watch. Would I have done this? No, absolutely not. But with such a fudgeable timeline, all things are possible. Do I think it would have been a more empathetic and logical choice to do what the showrunners are doing and send the wizards to Middle-earth earlier than the Silmarillion says? Yes, he's supposed to help the people of Middle-earth resist Sauron. So in that respect, I think the showrunners are being true to the spirit of that story, if not the timeline exactly. I can get over the timeline and accept this premise. Meanwhile, in the Southlands, Arondir and Bronwyn investigate a burnt-up village and discover tunnels. So now we know how Sauron's orc forces have been hiding so well all this time, preparing for their big move. They share a tender yet chaste moment before Arondir heads down into the tunnels to investigate and test even the coolest of cucumbers with that absolute claustrophobic anxiety mindfuck of a tunnel sequence. Oh, wow. That tunnel scene was a no-go for me. I know it's almost Halloween, but Jesus, Morgoth Christ, that ain't the way. I like my spooks clean and honest. Like the Freddy Krueger orc fingers we see at Bronwyn's house later, that was wholesome Halloween fun. We also get to see a new elfin city this episode. This one is the city that Celebrimbor runs. He's just a lord, so he's still lower in rank than High King Gil-galad over in Lindon. But he's still big man on campus, because as you saw, Eregion is quite a city. Celebrimbor has a plan for a hot forge that mysteriously must be ready by spring. A forge that's going to change the game for Elvendom, he says. I wonder what's driving these new plans. Why's it gotta be ready by spring, Celebrimbor? What's he really want to forge? And why the rush, mighty sus? The craftsman alludes to Gil-galad's, budget issues for builders? Qua? So they need Elrond to use his connections to outsource foreign workers who require less pay? I feel icky. Gil-galad, we just watched you crown your top commandos in your military-industrial complex with literal golden laurels. But you don't have enough budget for infrastructure? Okay. Even though Gil-galad's premise is absolutely butter scraped over too much bread for this, it gives Elrond a reason to go to Khazad-dûm and bring the dwarves into the fold, so I'll take it. And boy, am I glad he went to Khazad-dûm. Right away, Bear McCreary's expert soundtrack fills your ears and reverberates inside your stomach and creates butterflies. When we first start in with the dwarves this episode, Elrond crosses a familiar walkway. Khazad-dûm is glittering, brilliant, filled with waterfalls and sunbeams, and lovingly crafted statues and levels and stairs farther than the eye can see. As jaw-dropping as the inside of Khazad-dûm is for any viewer taking in the splendor of that first look, fans of the Fellowship of the Ring might feel their heart sink down into their stomach. It looks familiar because we saw it empty and in absolute decay. More than 3,000 years from now, Gandalf will fall into the chasm from this very bridge, fighting the Balrog. The dwarf armor, the helmets, I loved their costuming. Well, specifically, I loved their armor. I'm not sure I really noticed the costuming, so that's more of a shout out to the Weta Workshop smiths. My only complaint about the dwarves is their prosthetics. I feel like the dwarf prosthetics in the Hobbit trilogy were so detailed and unique. The dwarves really felt alien in the Hobbit trilogy. These Rings of Power dwarves, though, it seems like they just have bulbous nose prosthetics and some wigs, and that's it. They called it a day. Maybe the set designs took too much of the pre-production window, or there's some character coming later with incredible costuming and character design, and I'll be able to point to them and say, there's where all the dwarf development time went, and I'll feel better about it. But for now, I feel like the dwarves could have been better. And Dissa doesn't appear to have any prosthetics at all. It's just her natural face. Where's the crazy head prosthetics that Thorin Oakenshield's company trained me to expect? One of my favorite Rings of Power moments so far is the emotionally charged exchange between Durin and Elrond on the lift, where Elrond breaks the tension with his, "Only been 20 years? You look great. How'd you build up Khazad-dûm so quickly?" And Durin just loses it and says time means something to mortals. I lived a whole life, he says, while you were gone. I didn't think you wanted to be my friend anymore. It was so powerful. In contrast, it seems like Arondir, living constantly among mortals in the Southlands, Arondir understands the passage of time and the importance of acting quickly, which is why it looked like he might be confessing something to Bronwyn. It was either this episode or episode 1 where he came to her house. Oh yeah, it was last episode because there was the eldritch cow waste. But yeah, Arondir gets it. He knows you have to act quickly with mortals and manage your friendships. So Elrond really learned something this episode, and he saw that opportunity to get his relationship back on track and get his mission back on track. By the way, in my first Fanmarillion episode, I said that Robert Aramayo looked like a goblin, and I stand by my statement. But his portrayal is bringing me around to his personality, at least. He's slowly winning me over. Robert can hang. I also loved the softening of Durin at dinner with his family. Hearing how he so shyly courted his wife, how he operates as the crown prince but has a working household that contributes to the Khazad-dûm community. I hope we'll get to see Dissa sing some Rocks in Half later this season. The trailer shows her singing, and there's a particular song on the soundtrack that definitely sounds like it might be Dissa singing at some rocks. So I'm pretty pumped to see that. And what about that glowy treasure box at the end of the episode? King Durin seems to think Elrond is after the object inside. But what is it? Well, the lighting scheme gave us a big clue. Did you catch it? Those sure looked like the colors that the Arkenstone glimmered in the Hobbit trilogy. And we know that the Arkenstone was discovered deep in the bowels of a dwarven mine. The timeline is a little iffy on the when, but as I've already said, there is no such thing as a canon timeline for the Second Age on this show, so we can just stop trying to keep track of that. If they're using the discovery of the Hobbit trilogy's Arkenstone as a trigger for awakening some sleeping demons of the old world down there, that'd be a good way to build some more early connections for the movie watchers. I'm all for it, and I'd love to see the Arkenstone again. It's symbolic of the downfall of the Dwarven Kingdom of Erebor and of Dwarvendom in general, so I think it pairs nicely with the awakening of Durin's Bane. And that's not a spoiler, by the way. We've seen the Balrog in the Rings of Power trailers. We all know it's coming. For newcomers, the Balrog is the name of that fiery demon you keep seeing advertised. Yes, he's mean, and yes, he lives deep down under the Dwarven Kingdom from ancient wars of old. Those ancient wars we saw in Galadriel's prologue, in fact. Back in the Southlands, Bronwyn's annoying son has found some relics from his people's old war days when they fought for Morgoth. And it seems to want his blood, thank God. Maybe the magic of Morgoth remembers these people's bloodlines and is recognizing them. My guess is that Sauron is going to expect them to stand with him just as they stood with his lord. The sword is reaching into Theo and rebuilding itself with his blood. Very dark magic. It's reminiscent of the dark magic we saw in the icy caves in episode 1, when the orcs were glued to the inside of the walls. The Southland people are heading out for greener pastures. Wonder if there's a big volcano nearby. That'd be interesting to see before the end of the season. I'm going to put that down as a prediction. These people are going to walk past a big-ass volcano and it's going to get all moody. Wonder who lives there. Sauron? And Galadriel meets that Viggo Mortensen-looking motherfucker, Halbrand, whose ship has tragically been rent asunder by a sea beast. They float around and build trust, save each other, and survive the storm. The two important things that happen with them are Galadriel learns where Sauron's been hiding and gathering forces. Surprise! It's the Southlands. And as an aside, it's incredibly hard to imagine those Southlanders got all the way across the continent and boarded a ship in Arnor, or the eventual Gondor, and then got way out to sea in that brief time that Gil-galad was sending his commandos across the sea. That is a huge trek for those humans. In fact, that village was still smoking when Arondir and Bronwyn stumbled upon it. It was still smoking. So I can see we're adopting the Game of Thrones teleportation tools of storytelling right off the bat in season 1. That's going to get very annoying and take me out of things if it keeps up. That was a huge problem that fantasy fans had with the end of Game of Thrones. No teleporting. And the other thing we get is Halbrand clutching some stuff on a necklace. Very Aragornish. So we know he's got some secrets. He's a new character for the show. I'm not being coy. I really don't know what's going on with him. Except that I'm guessing he's going to turn out to be a displaced Númenórean, who are certainly royal in comparison to the Morgoth motherfuckers over in the Southlands on the main continent. So here's my guess for next episode. When we meet those Númenóreans who are picking them up from their flotsam, I think we're going to get some hints as to Halbrand's past connection to these regal island dwellers. I think he's going to be a secret Númenórean, maybe an exile. And then those closing credits with the dwarf theme overlaid. Magic. Cinema magic. The people in the fan screening theater with me, we sat right back down. Once that music started, we were all looking around and nodding at each other. Yes, Bear McCreary. Yes, we stan. We all just sat there and bobbed our heads together. It was movie gold. We'll talk all about the exciting new human location of Numenor, its history, and its characters on the next episode of the Fanmarillion, because the very last thing we see in this episode is a ship picking them up. And we know where that ship's going. Let's start closing this down with the trivia question for this episode. I mentioned in my last episode that the speech of Valinor, the language of the High Noldor elves, is considered to be very gauche. This language is referred to as Quenya, and I said that most elves at this time used the local elven tongue of Sindarin, which originates on the Middle-earth continent. Well, it's actually more than just gauche to speak like the Oldlanders. By this time, the speaking of the Quenya tongue is actually very frowned upon and borderline illegal. So the trivia question I pose to you is, why is that? Why is the Quenya language of the High Elves essentially outlawed during this time and only spoken occasionally by those who remember it? The answer is that the Quenya language is associated with elf-on-elf murder called kinslaying. The heinous act of kinslaying originated in Valinor and is what led, among other things, to some of the Noldor elves' initial flight to Middle-earth. Once the local Sindarin elves' leadership learned that these Noldor weren't explorers or bringing news from the old world, but were in fact exiled, banished criminals, the Sindarin did not want this language of banished kinslayers to take hold in their culture, so they banned it from schools. And now for our vocab word. On this week's episode, Elrond's trick to gain access to the tightly guarded Dwarven kingdom is to invoke the right of what's called Sigyn Tarhag. This isn't a thing in the lore that I'm familiar with, so it appears to be a fun new addition for the show, but these words are real Dwarven words. Sigyn Tarhag means long beards, which is a nickname for Durin's people in particular. So we can conclude that the name of this ritual came about in part because it's something Durin's folk just like to do. I'm Glorfindoll, and this was my show. I welcome your opinion, but remember, I'm not the fandom, I'm just a fan. Join the conversation at Fanmarillion on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Or, for flaming that's too spicy for socials, send me an email at fanmarillion@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This has been an Opus Nox Media production. Produced and edited by Ali Bachman. For more information on Opus Nox Media, please visit opusnoxmedia.com.